Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are looking behind the philosophical curtain. We're not talking about the Immanuel Kant from the textbooks, the cautious, boundary-drawing master.
No, this is the Kant of his final, deeply speculative years. We're diving into his personal, unpublished manuscripts, which are sometimes called the Fourth Critique.
And these fragments? They're from about 1789, right up to his death in 1804. So he never meant for us to see these.
Not at all. They really represent Kant grappling with the biggest questions he deliberately left unanswered in his published work. We're talking about the nature of consciousness itself, the self, God, and really the ultimate structure of reality.
So our mission today is, well, it's a bit of a challenge. We're taking these dense, fragmented note sources like on the ground of the synthetic unity and distilling what he was really wrestling with.
This is Kant pushing his own philosophy to its absolute limits and maybe, just maybe, stumbling back into the kind of speculative metaphysics he spent his entire career trying to, dismantle.
And it all starts with this core tension he was trying to resolve, right? From the critique of pure reason.
Exactly. In the first critique, he establishes the transcendental unity of apperception, which is a mouthful.
It's the I think, the famous I think must be capable of accompanying all my representations.
Exactly that. It's the formal condition that makes knowledge possible. But, and this is the crucial part, in the critique, he stops short. He refused to define the ground of that, I think.
He just said it's the logical requirement, not a thing, not a soul.
Right. He was being incredibly careful methodologically.
But wait a minute. Wasn't Kant's whole thing about avoiding speculation? What made him, in his final years, suddenly decide to dive back into this stuff?
Because the philosophical world didn't stop where he did. That silence he left, that undefined ground of the self, was immediately filled by his successors.
Ah, the German idealists. Fichte, Schelling.
The very same. They took Kant's pure, formal, I think, and just. They inflated it into this absolute subject that actively creates the world.
The guys who went wild claiming the I builds reality.
Precisely. And Kant saw this as a return to dogmatic idealism, maybe even a worse form of it. So he felt he had to go back to that core mystery. What is this consciousness, this self?
Okay, so let's break this down. He starts with what he calls the unsurpassable horizon of consciousness. What's going on there?
Well, think about it. If you ask the question, what makes consciousness possible?
Right. What's its source?
Kant realizes the question itself is circular, but it has to be. You can't derive consciousness from something non-conscious, like brain chemistry or physics.
Because the very act of asking, of thinking about the source, already assumes you're conscious.
You're already using it. It's the medium for the whole inquiry, so it's not that consciousness just poofs itself into being, which is absurd. It's that it is the necessary condition of its own appearing. Yeah. It has to be self-grounding.
And that leads straight into the puzzle of inner sense. Without a perception, it's easy, right? I look at this microphone, and there's me, the subject, and the mic, the object. Clear separation.
But with inner sense, when you're aware of your own thoughts, that separation just dissolves.
The awareness of the thought is a thought. The subject and object are the same thing.
They coincide. And this was a challenge for Kant. How do you describe this unified self without falling back into the old trap of calling it an immortal soul substance, something he'd already torn down?
So how does he thread that needle?
He sticks with his original distinction from the critiques. You have the empirical self, the stream of feelings and thoughts you can observe, and the transcendental I, the pure I think.
But he refines it.
He refines it massively.
Yeah.
He concludes the I is not a static substance, not a noun. It's an act.
The spontaneity of the understanding, the doing.
That's it. The transcendental I is pure activity, a constant synthesizing. The manuscripts put it beautifully, suggesting the pure I think is the doing which lies beneath all knowing.
That's a huge takeaway for you listening. The self isn't a thing you find, it's an activity you're constantly doing. It's a verb, not a noun.
And that very act of doing is always reflecting, but it can never be reflected on. It's like trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. The act of seeing always escapes.
And that activity is also the key to the problem of time, which brings us to the dynamic self.
Yes, because if the self is just an act, a doing, how does it stay the same person from one moment to the next?
I always struggled with Kant on time. He says it's the form of inner sense. But in these late notes, it feels like he's saying consciousness actually generates time.
That is the key shift. If consciousness were just in time, like beads on a string, you'd end up with Hume's bundle of disconnected perceptions. The self would just dissolve.
So Kant realizes it has to be the other way around.
Mhm.
Consciousness is the source of time's form. It has to actively build its own continuity.
Yes. The unity of the self isn't a given, like a rock. It's not static, it's dynamic. It's a unity that's constantly being achieved every single moment.
You used a great analogy before we started with music.
Right, think of a melody. The unity isn't in any single note. It's in the active synthesis of the note you just heard, the one you're hearing now and the one you expect next.
If you only heard the present note, there'd be no melody at all.
You just have a sound, no music. Kant gets really phenomenological here, breaking down that synthesis.
This is the retention, presentation, pretension part, right?
Exactly. He says there's retention, the immediate holding on to the past moment. There's presentation, the now, and pretension, the immediate anticipation of the next moment.
So the now isn't some razor's edge. It's this tiny dynamic structure that holds the immediate past and future within it.
It's the constant doing that braids these three strands into the continuous rope of the self. Without it, you just have sparks of sensation. No memory, no anticipation, no real experience.
And this leads him to something that sounds incredibly modern, the stratified self.
Yes. If the self is this complex, active synthesis, then self-knowledge isn't easy. It's an achievement. He talks about layers.
The top layer is the conscious self, my thoughts right now.
Then below that, the habitual or dispositional self. This is that vast kind of murky background of your settled beliefs, your skills, your tendencies that, guide most of your behavior without you thinking about it.
And then the deepest layer, the latent self.
The latent self. And this is where he sounds almost Freudian. It's the source of hidden fears, deep motives, moral impulses that are basically inaccessible to simple introspection.
Wow. That explains why we can be so confused about our own actions sometimes. We try to be honest, but we just don't know why we did something.
And this has huge moral implications. Because the depths of the soul are murky, you can never be 100% certain you're acting purely from duty.
You might be acting from some hidden vanity or fear you don't even know is there.
Exactly. But for Kant, that opacity isn't an excuse to give up.
It's the opposite. It demands more effort.
It demands moral vigilance. You have to strive relentlessly toward moral purity precisely because you can never be sure you've actually achieved it.
Which brings up the big question. If our empirical self is this murky, determined thing, where does the real freedom from morality even come from? This seems to be the threshold to his wildest ideas.
This is where he risks it all. He goes back to phenomena, appearances, and noumena things in themselves. And he stresses they are not two separate worlds.
They're two aspects of the same reality.
Right. The phenomenal world, our world of experience, points beyond itself to a ground which is not itself phenomenal.
And he needs that ground for the moral law to work. We have to be free to be moral. But freedom can't exist in the phenomenal world of cause and effect.
So freedom must belong to a noumenal aspect of the self, and this is the radical leap. If the noumenal self is outside the conditions of appearance, then it must be outside of time.
A timeless self. So he's saying there must be a consciousness that is eternal. I mean, that's a heavy word.
It is, but he defines it very carefully. Eternal here doesn't mean lasting forever through time. It means existing altogether outside of time, in an eternal present.
Wow. A timeless consciousness at the foundation of the very self that is synthesizing time for us.
And he pushes it even further. If the noumenal ground of myself is non-spatial and non-temporal, it has no where or when, then how can it be separate from the noumenal ground of yourself, or the ground of the world?
If you take away space and time, you take away the very thing that makes individuals separate.
You remove the principle of individuation. Exactly. The distinction between subject and object, between me and you, it just collapses into a single undivided ground.
The supersensible substrate, the absolute.
This is Kant, the great critic of reason, basically being forced by his own logic to affirm a kind of monism, an absolute unity.
That is just a stunning turn. He's not saying we can know the absolute with our theoretical reason.
No, he denies that completely. But he affirms the practical and structural necessity of assuming it exists. It's a faith grounded in the demands of the moral law itself.
Okay, let's pull this back down to earth. How does this wild speculation change how Kant sees our own bodies and other people?
Well, he tackles the mind-body problem directly. The body is not a separate thing, not a machine the ghost lives in.
It's not a container.
It's not.
No.
If the I is an act, then the body is the appearance of that act. It's how consciousness manifests under the conditions of outer sense. The body's consciousness itself as it appears to outer perception.
So when I decide to raise my hand, it's one single noumenal act that appears to me internally as a choice and to you externally as a physical movement.
Precisely. It dissolves the whole problem. It's a difference in how we perceive, not a difference in substance.
But that immediately brings up the problem of other minds. How do I know you're conscious? The old argument was
Okay,
sort of
right,
an
right.
analogy, right?
The old argument was, well, your body moves like my body, and I know my body has a mind, so I infer you have one too. Kant rejects that. He thinks it's logically weak, and based on that flawed dualism,
So what's the solution?
he says our awareness of other minds is original. It's not an inference. He calls it interpersonal perception.
So it's built into the rules of how I perceive the world.
Yes. When you encounter another person, your perceptual system is already structured to receive them, not as a walking object, but as a unified subject, a person.
We don't see a body and guess there's a mind inside. We see a person, an intentional being.
And in that moment of perception, the other person is revealed, as he puts it, not as an object to be known, but as a presence with which I stand in relation.
The other person becomes a limit of my world, but a limit that touches another world.
A world that, if you follow the logic to the absolute, isn't truly foreign at all. It connects right back to that supersensible substrate.
So tying this all together, where does this leave us? We've gone from the formal, I think, to this dynamic, time-weaving self, and finally to this absolute unity, all guided by the moral law.
It means the critical philosophy finally achieves its ultimate goal. By drawing the hard limits of what we can know, Kant makes room for a completely rational faith.
The structure of our own consciousness and morality points to these deeper truths: unity, freedom, internality, even if we can never prove them like a math problem.
And he leaves us with this final, incredibly powerful metaphor for death, the aperture.
Right. It's really beautiful.
It is. He imagines the empirical self, Immanuel Kant, the person living in time, the individual wave in the ocean, as an aperture, like on a camera, a window through which a single, universal, absolute light shines.
So when the empirical self, the wave, perishes,
The aperture closes, but the light, that noumenal ground, the ocean itself, it remains. It was never born in time, so it cannot die in time. The only thing that stops is that one particular temporary focus of that eternal consciousness.
that is just a profound way to look at our existence, a radical humility.
It is. And for you, as we close out this deep dive, that's the final thought we want to leave you with, straight from these final fragments. If the noumenal self is this common, unified ground, and if our actions are an expression of this underlying timeless reality, what does this imply about the moral law? About the responsibility we have toward the other who is not truly other?
And maybe think about the sheer intellectual courage it took for Kant to push right up to that absolute limit of knowledge, guided only by moral necessity, without ever pretending he could fly beyond it. Perhaps that's the true legacy of this fourth critique.